This video is sponsored by Surfshark Family Guy, one of those shows that everybody knows, so why am I bothering to do an intro? And the answer is that I want to justify why I'm making another Family Guy video, seeing as I've already done this one on Quagmire's dad, the episode which introduced us to Ida and then made me very sad with how it used trans people as a form of mockery and punishment for men. Seriously, the major driving theme of that episode was, aren't trans women disgusting? And they did very little to counter that.
When they move to a new place, they're supposed to notify the neighborhood, that's how it works! He didn't actually move, he's just visiting!
However, while yeah, I have already made that video and you should go check it out as a supplement to this one, that wasn't the last time that Seth MacFarlane and the writing team of one of the most popular animated adult shows of all time would tackle the trans issue, as we do in fact get two whole more trans episodes, which are the centre of today's video. Are they better?
But nobody on the internet ever takes the time to ask themselves, is this worth freaking out over?
Well, I don't want to spoil the conclusion, but don't expect too much, and you won't be let down too hard, is always my rule for trans episodes. And I think it especially applies quite strongly here. I mean, we are talking Seth. Of course my straight dog character would vomit after finding out they slept with a trans woman. Every straight man would feel disgusted to know that they slept with a trans woman, much the same way that a gay guy would feel disgusted by vaginas and women. MacFarlane. Any hope has to start at rock bottom and build from there. However, before we get into the first episode, I do have to talk about today's sponsor, Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN whose job is making sure that you stay safe while surfing the internet. Now I get part of it. And they do this by encrypting the data that gets sent between whatever device you're using and the big wide ocean of the internet. This stops the sharks of hackers getting your data when you use a public Wi-Fi, or malware and phishing attempts from getting access to you. Something which has become very useful since a lot of sites keep getting dodgier and dodgier. It also lets you change your virtual location to whatever country you might want to be in, which is very helpful because a lot of modern streaming services are pretty terrible when it comes to giving you the full access to the library, especially if you live in New Zealand, for example, like a certain person making this video does. Surfshark allows me to find the shows I want, when I want. Stuff like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which if I pretend I'm from the UK, I'm finally able to watch on the thing I spend a ton of money every month on. And right now you can use the code Simpson at surfshark.com/Simpson to get an extra 4 months free on your subscription to Surfshark and secure your privacy. The link will also be available below and in the pinned comment. With all that said, let's get back to Family Guy, as we launch into the first episode of interest, Season 17's Episode 13, Trans Fat. So the episode begins with a bunch of random bullshit at the bar. It's Family Guy, you know the deal. It's a lot of inane jokes mixed up with flashbacks that are not that funny really, and just sort of probably make the easiest writing job ever, I have to imagine. Family Guy always feels like they don't turn down people's ideas so much.
Peter, did you throw up in the sink?
Well, all the random bullshit occurs to get the gang to the big baseball game. Something which happens because Peter wins a competition for making a Red Sox ad. Peter then drinks a bunch of beers, because he's an alcoholic, and has to then go to the toilets, drunk as fuck. The men's toilet is way too chock-a-blocker though, which makes Peter instead decide to go and use the ladies' bathroom instead, which is surprisingly line-free. I guess maybe a commentary on the fact that there are no women at baseball games?
Screw that, I'm using the ladies' room. How bad could it be?
Actually, wait, I want to dig into this joke for a second, because it's odd, right? A generally accepted rule of comedy is that the women's bathrooms are normally busier and have a longer line. Anyone who has been to a club can tell you that. The reason being that a men's bathroom generally has a number of cubicles and then a greater number of urinals, while women's bathrooms have a number of cubicles that still amounts to less overall toilets than a men's bathroom. And much like in clubs, this leads to women using the men's bathroom quite a bit, because the line is shorter and the cubicles are sometimes unoccupied.
If you're a woman and you want to go to the bathroom, look at this line.
However, here, the reverse is true, indicating that aforementioned sort of sexist position about the diversity of genders at a Red Sox game. However, if we literally go back a single scene, we can see that the crowd is actually a pretty fair split of men and women, and also a variety of different representation, because I guess the woke diversity crowd got to the background animators for Family Guy. So the joke doesn't make sense here. It's not accurately portrayed or even leaned into by the show. And the stupid thing, the really stupid thing, is that Peter going into the ladies' bathroom isn't even used for anything. It's not relevant to the trans plotline that gets developed from this whole bathroom thing, that instead occurring because Peter gets directed to a transgender bathroom. A bathroom that he initially mistakes for a bathroom for Prince, and then a bathroom for space cats.
I'm not Prince.
It's not for Prince.
Space cats?
So the men's bathroom having a line was essential to the plot of the episode, sure, but the women's bathroom thing was completely redundant. But yeah, so Peter uses the transgender bathroom, it then gets blown up on the big screen at the game when he comes out, because he's used the transgender bathroom, and so that makes him transgender now.
Let's give a big Boston welcome to Peter Griffin, the first transgender Red Sox fan.
I mean, it's been put on the Jumbotron because the presumption of Peter being transgender apparently makes him the first transgender fan of the Red Sox, which, I mean, gets spelled out pretty clearly by the episode, and now we're off. You get the gist of where we're going this episode. It's an episode about Peter being mistaken for being transgender, and that leading to people presuming that he's a trans woman, rather than making the more obvious leap of assuming that Peter is a trans man. But let's face it, I don't think the Family Guy writing team knows what trans men are, or at least doesn't think they're funny enough to make comedy about. To put it plainly, the world reacts and mocks trans women, trans men, and non-binary people in different ways. It's all generally pretty negative, but there is a variance that gets theorized on a lot in gender studies. Like, one interesting theory posits that a lot of disgust towards trans women is based on the patriarchal view on manhood, that effectively seeing a man discard being male in favour of wanting to be a woman goes against the hierarchical sexism which is consistently claimed that women are inferior. Interesting stuff, very cool to know about, but not 100% related to this Family Guy episode, because I think they just don't know what trans men are. I do want to talk about two things from this episode that I find weird, much like I found the women's bathroom line weird, because I don't understand what the joke that was meant to come across with them was. The first is the fact that a transgender bathroom exists at all. These aren't real things. No place has a transgender bathroom. There are gender-neutral bathrooms, but anyone can use those. Like, Family Guy might be thinking that because this symbol has become the symbol for transgender people, and that certain signs that blew up during the whole trans bathroom debate, a debate that we're not even close to being done with apparently, had those symbols on them, then that means that those were trans bathrooms. But the truth was that those symbols were used to indicate that the bathrooms were inclusive for trans people. That trans people could use them alongside other people. Inclusively, not exclusively, to be clear here. Unlike the presumption with Peter in this trans bathroom, where it's assumed that anyone using it must be and is immediately transgender. that being a big enough deal that there are cameras waiting outside for them to immediately make a big thing out of a trans person existing at a baseball game.
The first transgender Red Sox fan.
Yeah, that's the second thing I wanted to talk about. The whole Peter getting put on the Jumbotron, and them announcing how he's the first transgender fan. That's a really weird thing to do and make a joke about. And I also don't know how to feel about the idea that Peter using the bathroom is the first transgender fan of the Red Sox. I mean, it makes me think that presumably other trans people in the Family Guy universe are using the non-trans bathroom, and therefore people are just not thinking they're trans because, like, trans people do enjoy sport. I'm saying I don't believe that Peter is the first trans person to go to a Red Sox game. I mean, he isn't trans at all, but you get what I mean. It's also just an odd thing to showcase people making a big deal out of with regards to trans people existing. And yes, both of those do bring me to what I assume is the thing some people watching are gonna get mad about. The argument that, well, all of this needed to happen because otherwise the plot wouldn't happen, you dingus, so shut up. And my response to that is, okay, well, couldn't this plot have happened in a different, less transphobic and weird way? Like, showing a transgender bathroom as something that exists and is to be used by trans people exclusively, that's sort of transphobic. And then showing people doing the very thing that is feared of having transgender-only bathrooms, that those trans people who use them would get targeted for using them and have attention drawn to them, well, that's also transphobic. So, like, was there not another way to have Peter Griffin end up accidentally being clocked as transgender? I mean, there are thousands of better methods with more comedic elements to getting that idea across.
Peter, you use the transgender bathroom, so now everyone thinks you're transgender.
Anyways, let's move on as we move on to the next scene, where Peter Griffin gets accosted by his employers at the Pawtucket Brewery. And they explain how they saw Peter at the game, and that they, as a company, I guess, fully support trans people, and they interrupt Peter, who was just about to clear everything up and explain how he isn't actually transgender, it's all just one big mistake, to tell him that transgender employees enjoy a transgender benefit at this workplace, something which catches his attention and stops him from clearing the record.
Stellar transgender employee benefit package.
Benefits? I'm trans listening.
The bosses then go on to explain how trans people get extra time off, gift cards, and a masseuse on site. And so Peter Griffin decides that he will in fact be transgender because there are economic benefits to doing so. A joke which is incorporated with a dig at Caitlyn Jenner that sort of implies that her transition was also done for fame and money.
Well, in the words of trailblazer Caitlyn Jenner, I will do anything for money and attention.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to criticize Caitlyn Jenner for. So many things. Like, holy shit, let me just make it clear that you can definitely dog on Caitlyn Jenner in jokes all day about the bad things she has done. And trust me, South Park did. Even South Park didn't make the connection that transitioning was merely something that was done to get attention. They instead went with the other shit you can mock Caitlyn Jenner for.
Buckaroo!
And this is actually gonna be a recurring theme of the Family Guy trans stuff that we talk about. This notion that being transgender comes with a whole host of perks in society. That transitioning gets you showered with stuff and freedom that regular cis people just do not have. Something that gets repeated enough that it makes me think that the Family Guy writers believe that's how it actually works in real life. Like, they're seeing the movement for acceptance for trans people, and acceptance that asks for trans people to be treated with the same dignity that everyone else is, and view that as some kind of over-the-top extra level of treatment. Like, trans people are still more statistically likely to face discrimination in the workplace, in housing, in court, in policing, in public spaces, and within their families and friend groups. This is a joke setup based on a misconstrued perception, one that reiterates a pretty harmful view of the trans rights movement and encourages that attitude of, well, don't they have enough already? Now they're just being greedy. Like, yeah, there is no such thing as a trans employee benefits package. Certain workplaces do allow trans people to use leave for surgeries and whatnot, but like, anyone getting an essential surgery can use leave for that, so not really a unique bonus for being trans. And you might say, well, it's for the comedy, otherwise the episode wouldn't continue, and it would just end right here. To which I would say, damn, I wish this episode would end just here. But also, what's the joke? Because if the joke is that Peter is greedy and willing to do anything for money, why does that joke also have to come entwined with a joke about trans people transitioning for ulterior motives?
You're entitled to supplemental time off, our on-site masseuse, and a $60 gift card.
Oh, they also drop the "so brave" line. You know, the classic line that people like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh and Steven Crowder all use when they're mocking trans people for existing. Really great stuff to see the contemporary audience that Family Guy is working for and with here.
So brave.
Great.
She is brave and beautiful.
Of course.
Peter says goodbye to the men's toilet at the workplace. He explains to his family what he is doing, which gets a rather appropriate response from Lois, who explains how what he is doing trivializes the lives of real trans people, though trust me, Peter pretending to be trans is actually quite low in the list of things in this episode that has trivialized the struggles of the trans community, as we've discussed so far. Peter ignores everyone's comments, makes it clear he has no idea what being transgender even is, despite the fact that he literally met and interacted with a trans person before this, and then decides that he has to at least try and look like the approximation of a trans woman from the view of a cis man who doesn't know what trans women are.
That is how appalled I am by this.
Other guys?
Sorry, Peter, I don't see you getting away with this one.
I think Peter Griffin in this episode might actually be considered to be a stand-in for Wellesley Wild, the writer of this episode himself, seeing as he also doesn't really know what being transgender is, refuses to learn, and keeps putting in trans people and trans storylines that are terrible attempts from people who don't really know what the fuck they're talking about. That's actually a pretty smart meta move there, Wellesley. I'm sort of proud of you for that one. Peter then confronts his guy friends at the bar with what he's doing. They agree that he isn't getting away with this one, and Quagmire then gets also sort of rightfully outraged about the fact that Peter is making a joke of something that he has some experience with. What with the trans woman Ida being his dad.
That's just it, Peter. This whole thing is a joke to you. Are you forgetting I have a dad who's a woman?
And yeah, the idea that Quagmire, noted serial rapist, is the one who is on our side for this episode does not make the bitter taste in my mouth any sweeter.
That's what it's all about, Glenn. Don't rape it back, rape it forward.
Peter then goes through a whole bunch of montage bullshit that is about them trying to feel good in themselves, feeling good and pretending to be a trans woman and wanting to look the part of it, despite the fact that their friends wouldn't support them in faking being trans. Yeah, what a twisted way of taking an uplifting narrative for trans people and making it this.
Talking night, walking games.
What's the fucking point of this episode? Peter is now wearing a dress and makeup and going around the neighborhood saying whatever he wants to men because now that he is a woman, they can't hit him anymore.
Woman?
Well, it's definitely true that I respect the boundaries of women.
Tiring. Fucking tiring. Peter does a bunch of whatever was deemed to be woman shit that day, in this case a white wine luncheon and gossip, something which they fail at because they shart themselves rather than fart. Peter then gets hit on the head with a fan, goes into a coma, and wakes up with the doctors having removed his penis because the company covers his medical care and so they could rush him through it, I guess. And him losing his penis now means he's officially a woman. As Bill Murray says,
that is one nutty hospital.
Yeah, nutty. And I wish you could get surgery that quickly and easily. Who wrote this episode? Seriously, it's like the most rushed trans episode of all time. It has no real plot or cause for any of it. It's just a series of events that happen to be lumped together with a bunch of random made-up trans facts, because I don't know, that's what was on the TV at the time, I guess.
We fulfilled your letter of medical intent for your sex reassignment surgery.
Peter gets told by his family that what happened to him is kind of his own fault. It's his comeuppance for pretending to be transgender. And then Brian does his classic faux liberal shit of saying how he's super supportive of the LGBT community, though he consistently keeps getting the acronym wrong because he isn't actually supportive and just pretends to be so he can feel superior to others.
You know, I've always been a great supporter of the LGBLT.
Nope.
LGTE.
Nope.
GED.
Unrelated.
Meg then does her thing in the episode and turns this trans thing into a bit about how we should learn to appreciate others for their differences, such as respecting those who would engage in self-harm. Get it? Meg is deeply depressing, and also, I guess, accepting trans surgery is in the same place as accepting those who cut themselves. I don't know if I like the sentiment of that statement, but I don't even think at this point that Family Guy is trying to make an edgy comment like that.
You know, our world today is filled with people like that trying to find their identities, whether it's cutters.
I think it's just accidentally happening as they go through the ropes of this arc that they don't even seem to care that much about doing something with. I mean, it's not like anything that's happened in this episode really made any sense at all, or was essential to get across the hilarious comedy that came from it. It's just a by-the-books, low-tier Family Guy episode that happens to drive-by hit the trans community on the way out. Kinda like Caitlyn Jenner, am I right? 'Cause she rear-ended a guy into traffic and killed him? Remember that? Like, comedy has two directions, really, I find. It can either be thought-provoking commentary, which makes you laugh at the revelations as they tie themselves into jokes, stuff like Bo Burnham's Inside, or they can be so hilarious and funny that they don't necessarily have to be making a larger statement on anything at all, like Taskmaster. In both cases, though, the core thing is being funny, and Family Guy doesn't succeed at doing that, which makes the statements that it incorporates and the political messaging that it presents really awkward and just tasteless. But anyway, now that Peter has a vagina instead of a dick, his family treats him as a real trans woman rather than just pretending to be one, because having the surgery, I guess, is the thing that actually matters more than the gender identity and psychological profile of the individual, some things which are just plain fucking wrong, and not at all good to use as a baseline for your cis audience to think about.
Congratulations, Peter. You're officially a woman.
Like, Peter should be wanting to reaffirm themselves as a man here, and the episode could illustrate how not having a penis doesn't remove the metaphorical manhood from his identity. But that would require more intelligence from the writers of Family Guy, something which I don't expect, nor ever think will really happen. Peter then gets too womanly for his friends, and they get mad at him for doing a bunch of stereotypical female shit in a stand-up comedian interpretation of what women are like.
Quick break to cry for no reason.
Can we do one last judgmental scroll through Facebook first?
In despair, Peter goes to the LGBT version of TGI Fridays and meets Ida, that trans woman who got dogged pretty hard the last time that Family Guy did a trans episode. And Ida gives us the humanizing speech about trans people, the moment where Family Guy tries to justify everything they've done so far by having a character say a bunch of stuff that reflects our real-world struggles and attitudes in a way that the cis audience will hopefully pay attention to. And that also means they get to point to the episode as being trans-positive.
When I first met you, Peter, I was already at the end of a long journey to find the courage to become a woman.
It's like kicking a person to the ground for 15 minutes before offering them a hand to get back up, and acting like you're the hero all of a sudden. Or supporting the slave trade for centuries before finally banning it, and acting like you're the good guys because you stopped it from happening. They do the sad music as Ida explains how she hid who she was for decades and lied about her identity to get by in society, knowing that it was killing her to do so, before she finally had the bravery to come out.
But I was dying inside, and the deeper I buried it, the more unhappy I became.
Something which is used to illustrate to Peter that he has no idea what being trans really is, and that all of what he has gone through is merely a mockery of the reality of trans people. Something which finally gets through to Peter, even though previous people saying almost the exact same thing before he got the surgery done didn't.
Peter, pretending to be transgender to get time off work trivializes a real struggle in this country.
And he has a little cry about being a bad person, and that he deserves what happened to him. The moral of this, I hesitate to call it a story, is laid bare as Ida points out that Peter has become a better man for this, that going through this experience has helped change his attitudes. And honestly, what the fuck are you talking about?
You were a bad person, but now you've taken a journey.
We've seen none of that. All we've seen is Peter feeling bad about getting a surgery that he can't change, and also feeling a bit bad about lying about being transgender in the first place to get the benefits of the experience, and that leading to this. Like, this isn't a cohesive storyline at all, or narrative, it's just the same shit of them needing to get things back to normal, and then throwing together something that is meant to make them feel better about what has been a really stupid and idiotic trans episode so far.
Congratulations, Mr. Griffin. Your surgery was a success. You're a man again.
Peter starts a Kickstarter to cover his surgery to reobtain a penis, a surgery that is dependent upon the idea that the trans community cares about others, cares so much that they will help a cis man who faked being a trans woman and accidentally got the workplace benefit of bottom surgery go back to having a penis and being able to be a cis man, I guess. And that's the episode. Well, apart from a little cameo of the cast of Bob's Burgers at the end, which has about as much relevance to what is going on as anything else in this thrown together mess of an episode. So obviously I'm pretty clearly not happy with what happened here, and I've outlined my major reasons during the critique for why I do not particularly like the direction this trans episode went. Aside from not actually featuring a trans person till the last few minutes of it, it also really heavily leaned into that idea that trans people experience some kind of blessed existence within the world for their struggle, like Peter is only attacked by others for being fat or being too womanly, even experiencing tons of support from their workplace and from society in especially a medical sense. And that idea does actually quite nicely lead us to the second episode I want to cover, Season 18's Episode 2, Brida. All about Brian and Ida reconnecting and having a relationship after the disaster of the last time they met. A disaster that ended with Brian vomiting on camera for a straight minute in response to the idea that he had slept with a trans woman, and then getting beaten up by Quagmire for sleeping with Quagmire's dad.
Where is that self-centered, arrogant son of a bitch?
Well, a core theme of this episode is also that notion that trans people are favoured by society, are given rights and the ability to do stuff that cis people cannot by virtue of being trans. A toxic notion that buys into the concept that trans people are already given too much freedom by the world being too woke and letting them get away with whatever they want, and let's just get into it and you'll see what I mean.
Did Seth MacFarlane leave Family Guy?
Oh, actually, wait. One thing before you and I move on, I want to just quickly talk about Seth MacFarlane. Because something I discovered really quickly from people when you discuss him and his involvement in Family Guy is this disavowment of his role in the later seasons. The presumption that his entire thing is just turning up, doing his voices, getting a paycheck, and then leaving. A presumption that is, I guess, designed to maintain this golden image of Seth as being only involved in the golden age of Family Guy and not its declining quality, as well as allowing people to act as if, yeah, he did some shitty things early on, but he got a hell of a lot better when it came to trans stuff in later things like The Orville. And is any of that actually true?
Fake news.
While it is a fact that the writers for Transfat, Brider, and even the first trans episode of Quagmire's dad were not Seth MacFarlane, I mean, he has talked extensively about the fact that he hasn't written for the show since season 3, and he hasn't basically done show running for the entire length of Family Guy. Seth is still, ultimately, the face of Family Guy. He's the only consistent executive producer for the show, and he has the kind of sway where whatever he says would go. I mean, The Orville literally was a pet project that he was able to make happen because of the successes of Family Guy, Cleveland Show, and American Dad. So while I think it is fair to say that Seth is not so much on the ground in the guts of the organization and development of these episodes, they all still presumably do cross his desk at some point. I mean, he literally does the voices for a bunch of the characters, so it's not like he is oblivious to what is going on with Family Guy, and he certainly doesn't have no real power. If he wanted stuff to change, he could do it. And we've covered The Orville and its trans arc already on this channel, you can find it here or in the link in the description, and one of the overwhelming elements that came out of that analysis was that The Orville didn't really know what being transgender actually was, and mixed it up with a lot of other groups, a major one being intersex people. An example of that is when the corrective procedure being used on a child to ensure that their gender presentation matched the expected norms of the society they belonged to gets called a transgender surgery.
You want to perform a transgender operation on a baby?
Like, nah, that's not us. That's not at all a transgender thing. Cisgender people have been doing unnecessary and potentially harmful medical interventions on children for decades to intersex kids, and not once was it the same as a willing and consenting trans person making the choice after consultations and years of psychological evaluation / lived experiences. Like, you can point at what The Orville does and say that it shows Seth being less explicitly horrible and more just confused about trans people. And while I accept that as being nicer on the surface, I still think it's a problem and something that we shouldn't just take as an improvement, so stop being so critical of them, eh? Anyway, with all of that said, let's now actually get into this next Family Guy episode.
Where'd we even go last night?
I have no idea.
Now, despite the fact that the name of the episode is centered around the characters Brian and Ida, they actually sort of form the secondary plot of the episode, not turning up until about 7 minutes into it, as we waste a bunch of time on some random shit that doesn't and won't interest us for our topic of discussion here. We do get launched straight into it though, with a very infamous scene from the episode. The scene which opens with Ida watching what effectively amounts to porn of her son sleeping with a woman on the internet, the bartender telling her that you can't do that in public, and Ida being able to deftly deflect that social requirement by telling the bartender that she is trans, and so therefore she can get away with whatever she wants.
Oh, it's okay, I'm transgender.
Oh, I had no idea. Do whatever you want all the time.
You see kinda clearly laid out there the exact everything that I've been talking about in how the Family Guy writers perceive trans-centric comedy. Like it's based around a strangely conservative view of the community that sees advances in public acceptance as actually being trans people getting favourability beyond that of other groups. This leads into Brian introducing himself to Ida, and them having a talk about how awkward it is to see Quagmire engage in the behaviours that he does, and to do it in such a public manner, especially for Ida as his parent.
You did it again, Glenn Quagmire. Oh my god! Joe, you have to delete this footage.
Brian then reminds us that he has a son, and we also quickly get it confirmed that Brian is a shit person, because he confirms that he doesn't talk to his own child, but still feels comfortable dishing out advice to other parents and acting as if parenting is some kind of big blessing that he understands. See the whole liberal hypocrisy that is the entirety of Brian's character, and honestly sort of lost its interesting elements a decade ago. I mean, it's hard to keep any one-note characters fascinating for that long, and Family Guy really proves that.
You're an old bag, you're blind, you chose to be on the hills, you still have bits of penis left.
Brian and Ida start hitting it off again, specifically with Ida hyping Brian up and talking about the good points to him that nobody else really seems to see, not even Brian himself. And like, yeah, you know what, it is nice for someone to have that kind of affection from a person, even if it is from a person who absolutely shouldn't respect you in any way because the last time you hooked up with them, you ended up vomiting for a minute straight before reenacting the shower scene from the Crying Game. I don't actually really know if Ida knows how Brian reacted to the time they slept together and when he found out she was trans. Like, I don't think it would matter too much to the writers of Family Guy because they'd probably just make the trans woman desperate enough to overlook such an immediate problematic red flag in a partner. But it's something that I do wonder because it's essential to Ida's character here, I feel. Regardless, Brian and Ida go get a room to sleep together, done at Brian's insistence, and because much like every time, Brian is a horn dog who lets someone gassing him up be the determining factor in how willing he is to have sex with someone.
You are the full package, Brian Griffin.
Ida, should we get a room?
Aha! After the deed, Ida mentions to Brian that she guesses now it's happened, they will pretend it didn't, and then see each other again at some distant point. So she is aware how weird it was that Brian slept with her and then just vanished, and she doesn't have the self-respect to stop herself from seeing a guy like that. Oh, that's actually just sad. Man, that bummed me out. Girl, you don't need him. There are a world of people who would be lucky to be with you that aren't this guy.
Well, I guess we'll pretend this never happened and I'll see you in another 2 years.
Yeah.
However, in a rare move for him, Brian decides to put his foot down and actually ask Ida out on a proper date, and to make a real go of this thing despite the fact that he probably is still dealing with a lot of transphobic attitudes internally. I mean, despite the fact that Brian says how he isn't so hung up anymore on this, and he isn't ashamed of Ida, he does still go running into the bathroom at the idea that someone might discover that he is having sex with her when the room service knocks on the door. So, yeah, I think Brian might still have a lot of problems to work through.
Not as hung up as I used to be.
Oh my god, you ordered room service? Are you crazy?
At the dinner, a waiter comes to the table with the easy knowledge that the fish is for the gentleman and the chicken is for the lady, before immediately having a panic attack and having to walk away because I guess the waiter can't tell which is which thanks to Ida being a trans woman, despite the obvious cluing in facts of everything that's going on here.
Fish is for the gentleman, and the chicken is for the lady.
I'll be right back, folks.
Thanks, Family Guy. It's always important to randomly drizzle in little bits of transphobia for fun, and to tell trans people that no matter how they might look, you can't expect people to know what your gender is. And we see more of those aforementioned problems from Brian when he struggles to be comfortable holding Ida's hand in public, clearly still having issues with the idea that someone might see him being affectionate with a trans woman because, you know, toxic masculinity and all that fucking jazz. When challenged on these facts though, Brian finally steps up to the plate and openly announces Ida as his girlfriend, taking a leap into actually accepting his partner, which is a good thing, though honestly, I'm still feeling just sad for Ida that she has to deal with all of this and didn't have the power given to her by the writers to walk away from it and find something better for her.
Look, there's another shuttle.
Get away from the window!
It reminds me of the It's Always Sunny trans narrative, wherein the trans woman involved breaks up with Mac because he is ashamed of her despite the fact that he keeps coming back to her, and she eventually goes and finds a guy who loves her for who she is and has a happy life with him.
Mac, I would like you to meet my husband, Nick.
Except Family Guy is playing with the idea of what if the trans person actually just settled for Mac and dealt with his bullshit because she's got no respect for herself. Brian introduces Ida to his family again, is prepared to make a big deal about the fact that he's openly dating a trans person, and then the family just kind of runs over his thing and does all the work themselves to figure out what is happening and come to terms with accepting that it's happening, with Peter giving us the takeaway point of, it's 2019. Things that were gross 5 years ago are heroic now.
It's 2019 now.
Yeah, things that were gross 5 years ago are now heroic.
And yeah, that's about the level of acceptance that one can expect from Family Guy. Notice how it's still dehumanizing, but it's positive dehumanizing now rather than negative. Sleeping with a trans woman is heroic rather than gross, because you, the straight guy, are making a sacrifice as a partner to sleep with and date such an abomination unto cis society. Yeah, I do still hate Family Guy and its trans-based humor, okay? It fucking sucks. I don't want to pretend otherwise. With that done though, Ida and Brian now need to tell Quagmire the situation, which will be a lot harder because Quagmire hates Brian, and the last time this got even close to happening, Quagmire almost beat Brian to death.
Oh god, I haven't even thought about that.
Mr. Quagmire hates Brian.
The family commits to helping Brian out here, inviting Quagmire over for a dinner to try and ease him into the idea, with Lois trying to get Brian to open up about it, while Joe and Cleveland listen in at the window because the friend group Peter has is horrifyingly dependent on each other and can't do stuff without one another. Serious FOMO problems.
Thank you for asking, Lois.
I see them.
They're both in there.
It doesn't actually end up having anything to do with the revelation to Quagmire that Brian is dating his parent. Like, I'd assumed it was going to be so that they could have a reaction to the news, like Cleveland and Joe would do something, but it's a sort of completely nonsensical joke setup that doesn't really connect. The writing in Family Guy definitely has gone a little bit downhill. It does seem to have really given up trying to have any sort of cohesive arc and joke structure, and instead just kinda riffs their way through to the end, like bad improv.
Oh, Peter just texted. He says he's stuck at work.
Quagmire tries to clamp down on his hatred for Brian as he talks to his father, being kind of a nice person in this episode by doing his best to not ruin someone that Ida clearly likes, even if he disagrees with it. I mean, Quagmire is still an unrepentant misogynist rapist, and so that has to temper any level of respect that I give to the character, and does ultimately sort of ruin every single good thing that he is a part of. I mean, there is the classic narrative convention that if you want your audience to hate someone, the best way to do it is by having them be a sex offender or a child killer.
Well, they made it through the whole season. Now can I have my own show, Peter?
Quagmire, you're a rapist.
Brian and Quagmire go to a space museum to have some bonding time, and they hit a bit of difficulty when trying to use Ida's membership passes and finding that the system has not updated to her new name and still uses her old name, with the receptionist even going so far as to openly talk about if she still has her penis, which gets rightfully pointed out as a super weird thing to ask.
And how's he doing? Still have his penis?
No, he doesn't. And that's a weird question to ask.
I mean, Quagmire and Brian don't really do anything about this whole situation. Like, if you were a supportive ally, you would probably tell them that their system is out of date and correct the pronouns and terms that the person uses rather than just adopting the misgendering like Brian does. But that's because when Family Guy gets even close to addressing something that actually does affect trans people and could be worth bringing up, Here being the way that so much of ourselves and our past lives is recorded, and that going through and updating all of this is a complete pain, and made even more painful when you find places that you forgot to do, which give you a sharp reminder of how certain systems do still view you as a person that you have transitioned from, well, Family Guy sees that and runs away from it, full tilt into the safe bosom of being transphobic instead.
I'm not seeing an Ida Davis.
Try Dan Quagmire. Lieutenant Dan Quagmire.
The bonding between Quagmire and Brian doesn't go so well, because they are still the same people, it's just that they happen to love the same person, and are trying to be cordial to one another because of that. And we really see this fact that Quagmire hates Brian, and why he hates Brian in full display at a barbecue event, where Brian tells Quagmire to go to the kids team and talks down to him and acts like he is Quagmire's dad, which is a little strange to do to a grown man.
It seems like that sometimes, I bet. Get down there, champ.
Quagmire and Ida then go off to have a talk, with Quagmire telling his dad that he hates what is happening, that the first time he accepted what she did because he thought she was settling with Brian after having a big change in her life, but now she is the beautiful and self-possessed woman that she is, and she is still going back to this loser, and he just doesn't understand why.
You didn't know if you had any options, so you settled. And now you've had time to adjust, and your choice is Brian?
To which Brian appears and does his best to prove that whole loser thing by talking for Ida in the most cringe way imaginable.
Because I love him, a resolved Ida said. I'm also a published author.
Quagmire then decides to put Ida on the spot and make her choose between him and Brian. Something which isn't a good thing to do at all. I mean, it's nice that this big end decision thing isn't actually just the trans stuff at all, but it does prove how shitty Quagmire is too. Like, he can't just deal with a person he hates for the sake of someone he loves having a happy life. Ida commits to breaking up with Brian, telling him that he isn't as important as her son, to the jeers of Quagmire, because he's a bad person, as we just mentioned, who doesn't have an ounce of introspection. I mean, yet again.
Quagmire, you're a rapist.
How many times can you say it, really, before you just kind of ignore everything Quagmire does as good?
See, that's what I mean! His whole life is a lie! I can't take this anymore.
And that's the episode. So, where does all of this leave us, you might be wondering? What's the big, momentous conclusion that I'm going to make around this? Not just tying together the episodes we've discussed here today, but also incorporating that other Family Guy trans episode I analysed in the past, and using it all to craft a revelation about the politics and perception of the writers and audience of Family Guy towards trans people.
I'm trans-listening.
Well, the name of the game here is Disjointed, because that's the way Family Guy comes across when handling trans storylines and humour. There is a real lack of unified identity between the scenes involving trans people, something that we see strongly emphasised by the fact that in all 3 episodes covered, trans people are used as a tool of mockery with all the same intent and insults that conservative comedy uses, making trans people appear to be gross, holding up the idea that we are disproportionately favoured by society, and also making our misgendering and confusion a funny and consistent part of how strangers interact with trans people. But also, trans people are given these weird moments where they spout a monologue about our struggle and difficulty that reads as if it were ripped from the guidebook on how to do a special episode about a minority.
I became an expert at hiding my secret, and the deeper I buried it, the more unhappy I became.
I also think it's important here to bring up the fact that there are no trans people in Family Guy. There are trans characters and cis characters pretending to be trans characters, but they're all voiced by cis actors. There is no creative process side engagement with us, something that I think can attribute quite heavily to the incoherent blend of transphobia and Wikipedia level trans supporting statements. Actually, it's even crazier than that they are all voice acted by cis actors. Every single person involved in this discussion, Peter, Brian, Quagmire, Ida, they are all voiced by Seth MacFarlane. This is literally sock puppet trilogy of trans episodes between a cis man and himself, with writing from other cis men to support. Look, all I want the people to get from this is that Family Guy and its defenders, and Seth MacFarlane when he gets asked about it, want us the audience to think that the mockery they are doing is just playful ribbing, and that deep down they believe the same things we do, and are totally on board with trans people and trans rights. The reality is, though, that the show has to be judged on what it shows, and what that is a series that portrays the exact same stereotypical bigoted jokes that I could find in pretty much anything from the early 2000s. Actually, most things from the early 2000s had a transphobic joke or entry in it. It's strange how ubiquitous that became post stuff like Ace Ventura, which I really do see as the turning point from the kinda misguided but ultimately positive older episodes in the 70s and 80s, and the aggressively disgusted comedy of the newer episodes in American cultural media.
Are you happy? Very happy. I've never regretted it, not for a minute.
I had sex with her at the Marriott! Oh, why? I didn't know it was her!
It just mixes that very basic standard of bad with a bunch of bland, uninteresting dialogues full of trans buzzwords, and then calls it a day. And that's hardly worth celebrating. So that's Family Guy. And what this video means is that I don't have to go back and talk about it again. We're done now, and this might be the last time we have to talk about a Seth MacFarlane project ever. God willing, anyway. Hopefully you liked what I said here, or learned something, or just found it to be passable as a void filler for an hour or so, and if that's the case, then I will consider it a job well done. To show appreciation, you can like, share, subscribe, comment, or go and check out my other videos on a variety of stuff. From trans episodes, to larger transphobia coverages, to completely not trans related at all deep dives on Harry Potter, Twilight, and soon Riverdale. If you really like what I do and want to help support the channel, especially with me struggling to obtain employment right now in the rather dodgy New Zealand job landscape, then the best way to do that is by going to my Patreon or Ko-Fi and subscribing there. The names of those in the $5 and up category should be on the screen right now, and I really appreciate all of them for helping to keep this channel going, despite the fact that I don't really offer too much to my Patreons in bonus content. Something that I'm currently trying to rectify. You guys are getting a very early access to Riverdale, so fun stuff, right? The money from there goes towards rent, food, power, internet, cat, and other bills that I need to pay to be able to keep these videos going, as me moving back in with my parents, or whatever other hardships could come up, would significantly hamper my ability to stay on the content creation treadmill. So yeah, please go check that out if you have the money and want to support independent art. Is what I do art? Arguably. Or arguably. No, that doesn't sound good at all. Let's pretend that that conversation just didn't happen. Oh, before we head off, let me just take a second here to also remind you of this video's sponsor, Surfshark, who you can go and get 4 months free on a subscription from with the code Simpson at surfshark.com/Simpson. Thanks to them, and thanks to the patrons for keeping the lights on around here, metaphorically at least. Anyway, with all of that said, thank you all for watching the video, and hope you have a great day.